So I'm just going to roll through this deck and then share the climate emergency declaration itself. So this is, again, this is in response to the declaration that was passed in 2020. I already alluded to it being a sort of a greatest hits of the things that are happening in Portland today, things that the city of Portland, capital C, can do to meet some of our goals. As a reminder, we have a 2030 goal of 50% reduction and a 2050 goal of net zero. So we really need a lot of effort starting today. Actually, really should have started a couple of decades ago to ensure we meet our goals. But these actions really encapsulate the best. This is what the cover looks like. You'll see it in a second. So for those of you who aren't tracking, it sounds like this group is. This came out in April, and actually subsequently we can even update this with a couple more quotes that continually share from an international perspective that we are in deep trouble. I don't know if you've been watching, it's been tracking it on the polls, but as substantial ice melts, it's only exacerbating the heating of our oceans, which is exacerbating the melting of our caps. And we are in for a world of trouble when it comes to sea level rise. So here's where we're at in Portland. So we know that we're at the point where we need to keep average global temperatures from increasing 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels. And the truth of the matter is that we were on track, and then we weren't on track, and we're getting back to it. But we need to take substantial actions to ensure that we start to hit these targets. And again, my earlier point still rings true. It's good for Portland to do this, because if not here, where? And if not now, when? Because people do look at Portland as a leader. So I do believe that when we take significant action to show that we're willing to put the pressure on industry, on the petroleum industry and fossil fuels, that people are going to watch. And so that's why it's important for Portland to take action like this. And as you can see, the reductions necessary are not going to be easy. But there's good news. We know the solutions that we need to invest in to meet our goals. The worst case scenario doesn't have to be our future. And I don't want to be my future. I don't want to be my kids' future. I don't want to be your future. But the truth is that if we don't get together, and again, I'm going to pause and say, this was an audience of our council and my colleagues around the city. This was a chance for the city of Portland to take stock from where we're at and say, what can the city of Portland do to be a leader in the region, to be a leader amongst our industry partners, our community partners, our government partners, and what can we do? So this is really focused on the city of Portland. There's a lot of information here, but I think it really tells an important story that when we start to get into the climate wonk, we start to break down our emissions by sector. And so our plan, these are color coded, so you can see it shortly, that we really start to tackle these different sectors in different ways. But you can see electricity supply, the buildings, how buildings use energy. So first it's electricity, what's in the grid. You can have all the EVs you want, but if they're plugged into a dirty grid, it's still bad for the planet. Then we're talking about transportation. It's not just electrification. It's also about active mobility. It's also about transit. It's about getting people out of single occupancy vehicles. And then we're working with industry. Industry is currently responsible for about 11 to 13% of our emissions. And we're not just going to be booting our industry out of town. So we need to work with them to go from a gray to green transmission and ensure that the next investment in our industrial sector is clean tech. And then we have these other, I won't call them phantom emissions, because they are known to us, but they're emissions from sectors like wastewater treatment, solid waste, fugitive emissions that we can eventually capture, but the technology is going to require a little bit more capital. And we know that we have the technology. I can't see questions, so if people needed me to stop and clarify, please just speak up. Okay, so we took this in a 3-year priority to kind of give you a sense of what this looks like. These aren't actions that are going to be completed in 3 years. They're just actions that if we don't get them started in the next 3 years, we're going to have a really hard time hitting our 2030 and 2050 goals, because some of them have a couple decade rollout for a variety of reasons. And so these are the priority areas that we're going to walk through in a second. the this is all acronym, I'm sorry, but I'll name all the different bureaus, but really the decarbonization, this is the emissions reductions work really lives in two bureaus right now from a day-to-day policy perspective. And that's our bureau, the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and the Bureau of Transportation, because we're talking about electricity supply, buildings, transportation, fuels, industry, land use, embodied carbon and food, and then some of the cross-sector work that we've been leading to ensure that the decisions we make at council, shadow cost of carbon, et cetera, are being captured. And then on the resiliency side, this is us starting to be really pragmatic about how we're capturing the different capital improvements that we're doing to not just build a more resilient infrastructure base, but also start to prepare for the worst impacts of climate. So looking at doing mitigation banks to solve for flooding, investing more in trees, natural resource protection or natural areas that have so many co-benefits to not just carbon sinks, air quality, habitat, planning for wildfire. I mean, a couple years ago, that was, out of a movie, that the orange sky was just incredible. Wildfire is not some other, its impacts are here, not just the fires themselves, the air quality impacts that come from them. That leads right into resiliency hubs. Where climate change is upon us, we need to start planning for it. And that means investing in resiliency hubs where people who are experiencing the worst burdens have a place to be safe, and not just for bad air days or heat, but also long-term freeze that we're going to continue to experience. And then internal policies. I'll lead up. Just internal policies, just the big things that we do to invest in our infrastructure. One of the things I want to acknowledge is that through the work that our infrastructure bureaus do, and I am always so impressed at my colleagues at the Water Bureau and the Waste Environmental Services, for example, whose day-to-day responsibility is to keep water flowing in and out of our pipes. And oh, by the way, they're also ensuring that that water is clean. And oh, by the way, they're ensuring that the water is being treated appropriately. And oh, by the way, they're investing in a future for us that's going to be resilient to cataclysmic impact, frankly. So I'm always impressed. And the acronyms are BES is Environmental Services. The Joint Office of Housing is JOHS. OMF is Management and Finance. Bureau of Emergency Management, Office of PFAS Transportation. That's Parks and Rec, Water Bureau, and Fire and Rescue. So those are our the bureaus that are invested in this. All right, I'm going to stop sharing for a second and flip to the declaration. Oh, there's a lot of questions. Megan, I'm going to ask you to help me track.
Yeah, I'm trying to tackle the questions I can as they're going, but I was getting lost in trying to find links to everything. Lots of good information to share there.
Thanks. All right, so I'm going to just pause. Are there any questions at that high level before I dive into the actual work plan?
What's the city council's view on the emergency work plan?
They were really supportive, and we had the I mean that sincerely. I think that there is always the great question of who's paying for what. What I'm about to walk through, you're going to see these are not cheap investments that the city has to make, and it doesn't include all the investments that individuals, industry, private sector has to make as well. And so the price tag gets exponentially bigger as we wait to implement. So the more we can invest now is going to save us down the road. And we're still in crisis, right? We're still in a situation where our cities hasn't fully rebounded from the pandemic. We're still dealing with a lot of blight and livability issues. Resources are going in just trying to fix and clean, and those are resources being taken from long-term capital investment. And those capital dollars are going to see the biggest gains for our emissions. And that's a tough place to be in, to juggle those challenges. We got to do it all. Okay, so here is the climate emergency declaration, and we'll drop it in the oh, this is the draft version, but it's the same. So we kind of break down the science. I kind of walked through some of this already, so you saw some of these slides already. The place I want to start is right here. So let me make this a little bit smaller. So we broke it down into two places: decarbonization and resilience. And I mentioned the 43 actions. This is broken down by those sectors that I showed earlier for decarbonization, and then resilience is just one big bucket. But we really try to do multiple things. Again, think about our audience. This is the audience of the city of Portland, starting with council, bureau leadership, including myself, about what we need to do to meet our goals. And so if you look across the different, look across the rows, we did a couple of things. We wanted to ensure that it was really clear what action we were solving for and what it mapped to. Was it their climate emergency declaration, the renewable energy resolution, or the 2035 comprehensive plan? What would the council request be? Like if we were going to go back to council with an ask, what would we be asking council to do? We just give a quick snapshot on why this matters. And then we acknowledge funding gaps and when we thought the work would kick off. And a couple of things here. The resource gap thing is a little bit interesting. There's a little key right here. You can see it says FTE gap and funding gap. I want to be really clear. We took a stab at trying to put a price tag on it, but the truth is we're treating it more like when you go to a restaurant and there's a menu and it has like the chili pepper symbol to denote how hot the dish is: 1 pepper, 2 peppers, 3 peppers. It's sort of like that. It's not supposed to like be exact. It's just try to frame, you know, action upon action, like the different range of sort of resources we're going to need to deliver these. So it's really, because frankly, I got asked frequently, like, what's it going to take to what's the price tag on the climate emergency work plan, you know? And I mean, that number is in the billions, but what does it take today to get those projects going? We try to give that number to our colleagues. So when it comes to electricity supply, this is some of the stuff that's the most significant in terms of greatest immediate impacts. Almost the other things can't work effectively: efficiency, electrification of our fleets and vehicles, if we don't nail number one, E1 and E2. So that's basically our commitment to saying we need to green the grid. We need to ensure the energy that's flowing through our grid is green, and it's not just being passed, the burden is being passed on to some other community somewhere down the line. So we're looking at local investment through PSEF, that's a clean energy fund. But really the goal is to get 100% clean electricity implemented. That's a law that's already passed, and then we just have to ensure gets done through investment. So it's a pretty big deal. So then after you've greened your grid, now we're looking at buildings. And so this looks at not just new buildings, which we obviously have existing policies for green building standards, but really the big critical area is greening our existing buildings. So we see a lot of opportunity here, not just to reduce energy use, but to ensure there's good air quality, ensure our buildings are resilient. So there's a lot of investment opportunities here, but there's also gonna be a lot of costs associated with that one. The city also has to lead by example. So we are updating our own green building standard to ensure that the city's operations are the gold standard for and leading by example on how to reduce and eliminate emissions. PSEF will continue to invest in different infrastructure, focusing on our low income and Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. But we see this as a core function of the fund to ensure that our homes are livable, safe, and off the grid, or on the grid, but on green energy. And the other exciting one that we're going to be diving into next year is look at the embodied carbon in things we make and create. And so this looks at like literally the carbon content of the stuff we're using. So it's not just building the most energy efficiency buildings, but what is actually, how are we working upstream to ensure the materials that we're using to create those buildings are have the lowest life cycle impact. So that's some pretty next level stuff. We've been talking about it for a while, but we have the resources. We got funded by council to start that work, so we're pretty excited. Now moving into transportation. So 40% of Portland's emissions come from transportation. So a lot of the big moves on that are going to be found in this section. A lot of the work that's listed here is led by PBOT. That's our Bureau of Transportation. And you can really center it into really 3 simple buckets. First, we need to get people out of combustion vehicles and into electric vehicles. Second, we want to get people into multimodal transportation, meaning on buses, on bikes, walking. So that means our streets have to be safe. We want to be ensuring that our transit safe and reliable. And then the last thing is we want to make sure that the fuels in our vehicles are low carbon or eventually no carbon. So that's part of the transition we're in right now with renewable diesel, getting into electrification once we have diesel vehicles that can do the work. And it's also ensuring that we have the charging infrastructure so that when we do have all those EVs, they can actually plug into something, and what they're plugging into is green. Same. Oh, the other thing I want to just quick caveat. So this is one of those challenges when we talk about emissions. Somebody mentioned earlier about in the chat, I believe, about hybrid. What we're finding is a couple of things. So the city of Portland right now, little tangent here, going a little meta. We are evaluating the back to work, the future of work for the city of Portland employees. Many of us have been working from home. Megan and I are been doing hybrid. But the question is, what's good for the environment? So early on when the pandemic hit, it was a no-brainer that people not driving in downtown or going into the offices totally reduced our emissions. That's a fact. But the whole system sort of shut down. So what we're seeing today, though, is that although people aren't going back to work, vehicle miles traveled are back to pre-pandemic levels. So I gotta say that again. So even though people aren't going to work, vehicle miles traveled, the amount of times, amount of miles people are driving are back up to pre-pandemic levels because people are just driving different ways. A couple of things, like, so I'll use anecdotally, I have 2 kids. Even if I'm not working, I'm still driving my kids to school or picking them back up, right? My partner, she's bikes because she's better than me. But also what happened is there's people going into work 1 or 2 days a week. Those used to be 5-day a week transit commuters, but now they're driving in 1 day a week because I'll take the bus. I don't trust it. It's not safe. It's just 1 day a week. I'll pay for parking. So we're actually seeing an increase in vehicle miles traveled, even though hybrids existing. The other way that we're not so sure that hybrids benefiting our climate is that, and this is generalizing here because we're waiting for all the data, but generally speaking, buildings in Portland, commercial buildings in Portland are more energy efficient than our homes. So now we had all those people working in high density buildings. High density typically are more energy efficient. Now they're all at home. Now they're all in homes that weren't really designed for 100-degree heat. They got all their fans and their coolers, and all of a sudden we're seeing a higher uptake in energy usage in residential. So we're not totally convinced that hybrid is going to be good for the climate. We're still working on the data though. Back to the presentation. Thanks for letting me go on that little tangent rant there. Mentioned earlier, industry has a significant role to play in emissions. We have a significant role to play to help them green their operations, and more importantly, as we look to future investments for economic development, making sure it's clean tech, circular, inclusive. We're seeing really interesting options and opportunities coming out of Europe that are totally viable in Portland. We are a port town. We should be leveraging our rivers more effectively, not polluting them, and simultaneously using those important throughways for a positive industry. And we are the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. And so we're looking at climate, but we're also looking at the ways that land use influences our climate. We have a centers and corridors model, meaning that we want to see more people living closer to transit, closer to resources, so we can minimize driving. We want to see our communities designed for active transit, so that we have safe streets and we have safe sidewalks so people feel comfortable getting from point A to point B, not in a car. And then lastly, but not least, we want to see people have access to resources in a way that there's density, so you can live, work, and play in a tight space, because we think that the broader spaces could be used for natural access for hikes and play and fun. And then I mentioned food earlier. We're tackling food from a waste perspective right now, but and a reuse from a goods perspective. But the long game for BPS is evaluating low carbon diets and low carbon food systems to ensure that we're tracking the consumption model of the food industry. But in this particular action for the next 3 years, the focus is on food waste, mainly because we have some pretty significant programs rolling out. Mandatory composting collections rolling out to businesses starting this year. And then I alluded to this cross-sector thing, but this is really the city of Portland's operations and how we're, whether we're building something or we're buying something, ensuring that we are identifying the impacts from a carbon perspective. Okay, so that's sort of the decarbonization, that's the emissions reduction side. This is the resilience priorities. So these are the things that we're doing as a city to invest in our communities, both people power and building power and land use, all the ways that we're investing to ensure that we have resilient systems. So we start with flooding. I alluded to it, but spoiler alert, our rivers are ripe for flooding. We're seeing 100-year floods now, maybe every 5 years. And so we are projecting for some pretty substantial rainfall. Thank you, climate change. And so we are actively working to update our floodplain maps to ensure that not just that we know where those floods are going to happen, but so we ensure that we have, we're in compliance with FEMA. So homes and businesses that are in the floodplain have access to floodplain insurance. So it's a real practical reason why we're tackling that, not just from a land use perspective, but also from an insurance perspective. Still with the floodplain mitigation banking is going to be a big investment the city makes over the next 10 years. That's basically us carving out parts of the river from development so that we can ensure when there is a floodplain, there's spaces along the river to catch it. I can't stress enough how important that's going to be for our region. And then trees, I think if you haven't been tracking, the city got some not good press when it was conveyed that we've actually been losing tree canopy. So we will be investing both from the Clean Energy Fund, but also from an updated master plan for urban forestry, essentially a real increase in investment in our urban canopy. The co-benefits of robust urban canopy cannot be understated. It's a carbon sink, it's a traffic calmer, shade, could be production for fruit, really significant investment for the city over the next, really going beyond 3 years, but over the next 3 years, ramping that up. And then natural resource protection. We have a vibrant natural resource area in Portland and the region, of course. And so just ensuring that our policies are reflective of our commitment to protecting that. And again, the value of our natural resources can't be understated, from watershed management, again, carbon sinks, ensuring that we have, biodiversity, so many value added benefits to a robust natural resource program. And we'll be investing in that continually. I mentioned wildfire earlier, but yeah, we are evaluating and really accelerating our wildfire prevention program with the county and the state, really to just be prepared as we have those drought type springs that lead to wildfire summers and falls. We just have to be prepared for that, and both from wildfire protection and then from the health impacts of heat and smoke. So once again, we had a real heat scare summer, and we just don't have the infrastructure in place yet to support our communities that are suffering from those days where it's just too hot and their homes weren't designed for that kind of heat. So not just PSEF, but our emergency management program has been ramping up resources and solutions. And the big moves are going to be coming over the next 3 years, where we invest in resiliency hubs, both for existing city infrastructure, so like community centers and firehouses. We're going to get those ramped up to be places that people can take shelter from the heat and the cold. There's resiliency hubs. Jump the gun. And then again, internal policies, can't stress this enough. The city has substantial investments to make in our infrastructure, and we want to do so with mitigation and resilience in mind. And so that just wraps sort of the 43 actions. I went through them very quickly. A couple of caveats: every action in the decarbonization side is grounded in data and science. There's a spreadsheet that's an interactive database that anybody can go into and tinker to see what it looks like to move some of these around. Like if we accelerated one action, what would it do to another? And it's sort of how we built our models. Again, this is what the city of Portland is really focused on. There's other partners, the county, the state, federal government, They're going to have an outsized role in a lot of the different things that are going to really need to happen for us to meet our goals and do it well. But this is the place where the city of Portland has great agency. This is where we're starting.